What is up, booktube? It is Monty, and today I am back again once again with the start of another video. We are finally doing a wrap up. It has been a minute. Last wrap up was definitely back in April. I had every intention of wrapping up May. It would have been nice, would have been easy. There was only 9 books. And then June just got away from me. If you don't know, I do have a Patreon. It's linked down below in the description. In the month of June, because it has 30 days, I was daily vlogging. And I think that's what made it a wrap. There was just, I couldn't find it. So we are going to wrap up May and June today. So you might want to go and get yourself a beverage. I have some water. Because there's going to be like 28-ish things discussed. So these are all the things that I can publicly discuss with you. I have one ongoing year-long project, and I read one book for that over the past couple months. So I'm behind on schedule, but that is not included. So this is everything that I can publicly talk about. And so we're just going to get right into it. So the first thing that I need to talk about is Drowning by TJ Newman. This came out, I believe, in June. I think it came out like the beginning of the month. And here's the thing about this book. I loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. No notes. How do I talk about this book? So last year, was it last year? I don't think it was last year. It might have been 2021. Sometime in the past, I read Falling by TJ Newman. It was around the same time that I read the Alex Michaelides. Around that same time, I read Falling by TJ Newman. And that was a hijacked plane narrative. And so when I saw that Drowning was a plane crash book, I said, TJ, I don't know if we can keep doing this. You know, like so much of the bookish community in the online space seems to really just be a discussion of authors redoing things, reduxing things, going places they've already been and trotting that same ground. And I think this is one of the instances where on its face, you know, a mystery-esque thriller, not really a mystery, but a suspense book set on a plane, there's a disaster, we're trying to get out of it. You would think that we've already explored everything that there is to explore there. And you would be wrong, because Drowning was better than Falling. Here, this plane is stuck at the bottom of the ocean, which, in light of recent news, with that submersible, I hate to see it, maybe it'd be a little bit more, maybe more harrowing, maybe less harrowing, I don't know. All I know is that this book almost had me crying in a Target. I was listening, walking around, doing my grocery shopping, and I was on the verge of tears. I just really felt for these characters. I really enjoyed the narrative because it was so much more than a rescue mission. It was really about family and connection and loss and survival. It was just everything that you would want in a disaster book, but amplified to the next level. Like this is what you need to do. It's what needed to be done. I love this for TJ Newman. TJ Newman got a lot of press off this book. They were everywhere. So I think this book is doing well. And if you haven't read it already, pick it up. Why not? It's not really spooky ooky enough for Summerween or whatever, but y'all love a thriller. If I know anything about the online bookish community, it's that y'all love a thriller. If there's one thing about me that I know to be true, it's that I'm going to utilize an Audible free trial. And when I utilize an Audible free trial, I'm going to forget that I'm utilizing a free trial. And so I had this credit lying around and I was like, what am I going to use this credit for? And then it was revealed to me that I'm a horrible stan, because Alyssa R. Sloan, author of one of my favorite books from back in the day, back when I was still running a book club, The Unraveling of Cassidy Holmes, she wrote a new book. Haley Aldridge is still here. And this is sort of, in the online Goodreads reviewer space, talked about as like her free Britney book. I feel like that's not really the case here. I feel like, I mean, sure, there are parallels. You can make the case, the argument if you want, but I do think that it's distinct enough. You know, like it's really not that. So Haley Aldridge is still here is the story of Haley Aldridge, a girl from small town Texas. All the best people in life come from Texas. I don't make the rules. They just got really talented people down there. And so she came to California with a dream of being an actress. And so she was on this really highly successful sitcom on network cable for like 10 years. And she had some movie roles that kind of went somewhere, kind of didn't go somewhere. And it's really the story of her being entered into a conservatorship. And it's her telling the story to her twin daughters because, you know, she doesn't have the rights to them. Like, she doesn't have parental rights. And so she's telling the story to her daughters. And so a lot of the things in the book are, I think it's understandable the way that they're written because it's only from her perspective and it's her relaying this information. It is really an extended flashback sequence that is interrupted by her daughters asking her these questions. And I think that it's a book that's kind of flying under the radar. It was not a book of the month choice the way that Unraveling was. But I think that if you like the unraveling of Cassidy Holmes, then you really do need to read Haley Aldridge Is Still Here. Because like I said, you might be able to compare it to a Free Britney moment, but I do think that they are distinct enough and different enough that her story is just, it's fun. It's fun. I hesitate to say this. I hesitate to do this. Haley Aldridge Is Still Here is a genre of book that I like to be in. Like, that's the fictitious world that I run in. But I do understand that a lot of people, the only reference point they have is like a Seven Husbands. And so, like, if you like a Seven Husbands, you might like this. But again, they are distinct and different enough that it might not be for you. So go in weary. And then the reason I say weary is because this other book that I read in May, you would think that I would like it too. And it's called The Daydreams by Laura Hankin. This, I think, was from Berkeley, and I don't understand why they published this book. I gave this book 2 stars. It was my first 2-star of the month of May, and this book was just not very good. This is chronicling a cast reunion of a teen soap show that ran for 2 seasons and had this like cataclysmic season 2 finale that is like infamous. And so we have these 4 people coming back together, and we are simultaneously learning the reasons why the second season of that show went off the air, and seeing this reunion being staged so that several of these people can, what is what I'm looking for here, can rehabilitate their image. And here, I think the main problem with this book is that the main character is just the wrong person. I understand the narrative that Laura Hankin was trying to go with and for, and when you read the book, you understand why this person is the main character. But regardless of all that information, they're still the wrong choice. This is the person who did not need to leading the story, and it made for a lackluster reading experience. Remember when I plugged my Patreon at the beginning of this video? I'm gonna need y'all to click over there because the next book on this list that I read, I just can't do it. I can't talk about this book again. And so every month I let them vote on a selection of books that I have chosen. Other people are far more judicious. You know, they have their patrons suggest books for them and they put it in a cup and they come to their little TBR videos and they pull out these slips of paper that are always too many papers for the container that they've put them in, which bothers me as a viewer because I don't like it. So I'm not like them, you know. I go out into the world and I look at all the selections of books that are available at my library, or like the 30 that I haven't read on my bookshelves, and I go to them at the beginning of the month, sometimes, you know, the end of the previous month, sometimes I'm on it, sometimes I'm not, and I'm like, hey, here are 3 to 4 books that are on my radar that I might want to read that I think I could build a video around and give it to you guys as one of your little perks for $3. And so in that month of May, they had me reading To Paradise, and I say they again, I put it on the list. I had an arc of this from Libro FM, and I hadn't read it because it's Hanya Yanagihara, and I don't like them, but it was free, and so I said, why not? And then I read it, and I found out why not, because if I thought that A Little Life was bad, To Paradise, even worse. If I thought that Hanya Yanagihara hated black people after reading A Little Life, To Paradise was weird. It's weird. It's bad. It's bad. There's a lot of interesting attempts at creating an interesting narrative, like structurally, and I don't think it works. I think that there's a clear through line through this series of what read like novellas, but the through line is convoluted and unnecessary, and it just is bad. And I don't really want to talk about it because I talked about it over there, and I understand that it's sad because it's behind a paywall. It is what it is. The book was bad. I gave it 1 star. Then, as a pick-me-up, I said, okay, I just finished Hanya Yanagihara. I think at this point, I was in the middle of the month. What does Goodreads say? Goodreads says I finished that book, yeah, May 19th. So it was like halfway through the month. The month was almost over. We're actually past the halfway point. So I said, I need something to bounce me back. And so I said, Fractal Noise, Christopher Paolini. You can't see it because I think it's like right here. Yeah, it's like on this shelf right here. But To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is one of my favorite books the year that came out because I was just a little bit gagged by how good that was. And it's still one of my favorite adult science fiction books. I think that Christopher Paolini just really did what needed to be done. Is that because I was a childhood Aragon stan? I don't know. But I just really appreciate what he did there. And so I read Fractal Noise, the one with the AR cover art. So I'm a scandal. But So I listened to it from the library, and I gave this book 4 to 5 stars. Now, this book is interesting. Aside from the AI cover art scandal, which is a discussion for a different person, it just is. And so this is, I thought, it's very distinctly different than To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. It's a kind of a book that makes sense when you find out that it was based on somebody's dream. So in the afterwards, we're told that, he had this dream and he's been working on this idea for even longer than he worked on To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, because Sleep in a Sea of Stars was like a 10-year labor of love. And I think that this just was a little bit too long. We're following this group like this, the book starts off on this spaceship and it's orbiting this newly discovered planet that they may or may not be trying to terraform. They may or may not be doing some, this reconnaissance research or whatever. And then they spot this anomaly. And so it's decided by the space crew that this group of, I think it's like 4 people, are going to go down and map out this anomaly. And so the rest of the book, after they descend onto this, this planet, is these 4 people experiencing a variety of experiences. Experiencing a variety of experiences. I think that I don't want to even talk about it, partly because, I read it a couple months ago, but also I think that this book is definitely, the destination is in the journey, because when you get to the end of the book, it's not the most satisfying ending. And so if you don't appreciate what's happening along the way, then what happens at the end is just, you're really not going to appreciate anything. And so I don't think this book is for everybody, but also To Sleep in a Sea of Stars was not for everybody. And so Christopher Paolini, he may be hit or miss for you, but for me, it was a banger. I had a good time. I enjoyed the audiobook experience of this one, 4 to 5 stars. The next 3 things I read were in a reading vlog, so I'm not going to talk about them here, but Chain of Thorns, Chain of Gold, Chain of Iron, the little Chainwork series, there's a reading vlog. Go watch the reading vlog. It'll be linked in the cards. The last book I read in the month of May was You Don't Have a Shot by Raquel Marie. I don't think that Rocky can write a bad book. I don't think they can. I don't think it's in them. I just don't see it. Last year, you can kind of see it poking its head out in the background back here. Ophelia, next to Act Cool in my American Royals. But this is the story of a girl. This is the story of a girl going to soccer camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains. If you know anything about me, I love me some Santa Cruz Mountains. Love it. So she's having a hard time. Her mother has, I don't think recently passed, but her mother has passed away. And her father is a little bit overbearing. And the only thing that's really bonding them is soccer. And so she's playing soccer and she kind of blows this really important match right before the end of the school year. And so she's going to soccer camp, and part of the story at soccer camp is maybe there's going to be a way for her to kind of rehabilitate herself and have a shot at something that she had previously missed out on. But the person at soccer camp on her team is her school's like big rival. So now they're going to have to work together and overcome things. And it was just a really good time. It was a good time. I had a fun time. It was giving summer camp vibes. It was giving young romance. And yeah, like I said, Raquel Marie cannot write a bad book. Ophelia, after all, is just a contemporary. You Don't Have a Shot is a true romance, so there's a happily for now. And while I do think that most people, and when I'm reading these little romances, they're like, oh yeah, those people are going to break up. I said on a couple occasions, people are going to wind up on Investigation Discovery. I truly believe that that couple from that book, they're good. They're good. They're good. Love that for them. Then I read The Mysterious Case of the Albertan Angels by Janice Hallett, and I gave this 3 stars. This isn't a bad book necessarily. I just think that it was not conducive to a physical reading experience. I read The Appeal by Janice Hallett on audio, and it worked out for me. And reading this collection of text messages and emails and transcribed interviews was just really boring. The book kind of felt flat, very one tone, even though I could understand that the content was modulating from like serious conversations to annoyed conversations to very like amused. Like I could see the tones, but it just felt very flat because of the way that all the information was presented in the exact same fashion. And there wasn't, I feel like when it's just like text formatting and there's nothing like visually to aid that, it just falls flat for me. And so this was a fine book. It was okay. We're investigating like where this baby who was born into this cult 18 years previously is in the present day, and how our true crime investigator is kind of wrapped up in the narrative. And again, it was a fine read, but a month later, it hasn't really stuck with me. Then my second read of the month of June was romantic comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld, and this was just bad. It just wasn't good. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about this. I think I'm done with Curtis Sittenfeld as an author. Once we get into these June books, I did vlog all of these, so if you really want my in-depth thoughts and opinions, again, down below, link to the Patreon is there for my in real-time thoughts about these things. Romantic comedy wasn't bad, it wasn't good. We're following like an SNL writer as I think she's going back home. Let me go to my Goodreads review. Yeah, like she works at this like SNL type show, and then she starts dating this musical guest, and it's just not good. Like it was, and it's not at all memorable. At least Rodham was memorable. I have retained nothing from reading romantic comedy, which is probably a good thing I didn't rate it. Then I read Chloe and the Cowshall Boys. This was fine. Okay, so we're following Chloe, who is in the Philippines, being raised by her single father. Her mother's in California. They're not divorced, they're just separated. And she's been accepted to USC School of Animation. She really wants to be an animator, but I think she's coming up on her 18th birthday. And her family is like setting her up on these series of dates. And the dates themselves were just kind of boring, and none of them really amounted to anything. And it's not that you could even tell like who the date was going to be in the end. It was kind of lackluster. I did appreciate the friendship she had in this book, and I appreciated the relationship that Chloe had with her family. But aside from that, this book was, again, it was just very average. Nothing really stuck with me, which is fine because this is, a book aimed at young readers. And I'm not a young reader, so I think for the target demographic, they would probably have a better time than I did. But for me, for what it was just okay. The next book I read in June was also okay, and that was Ride or Die by Gail Agnes Moscavenil. And this was another one that was fine. Here we're following Lola, I believe her name was. And she is kind of a person who is a little bit impulsive, if you will. And she and her boyfriend had broken up prior to the start of this book, and her boyfriend had given this necklace that belonged to our main character to somebody else. And so she's actually throwing this party at somebody else's house to be able to steal back this necklace that belongs to her. And in the process of doing that, she loses the necklace in this closet where she runs into this other person, and they kind of agree to set each other up on these like series of increasing missions, like increasing in difficulty or whatever. And they're not really going to communicate with one another, and they're not going to reveal their identities to one another. They're just going to keep doing these things. And this book just felt a little bit one-sided. Like we would see our main character Lola going on these missions and having a hard time and having to overcome these things. And then she would message this person, and they would, get their mission, and we would never see what theirs was, even though it was supposed to be getting harder and harder. And then they would just complete the mission and everything would be fine. And it was just a little unsatisfying. And I just didn't care about Lola. I didn't care about this relationship that was supposed to be becoming a little bit romantic between the two of them. And at the end of the day, like, it was just fine. It was a fine read. I think if I was younger, I'd probably have enjoyed it more. But because I'm not younger and I read it when I did, it was 3 stars. But I do recommend it. I would read another book by this author. I think I was excited more than the book was able to fulfill. Then I went and I changed directions a little bit, and I read Burn It Down, Power, Complicity, and a Call for Change in Hollywood by Maureen Ryan, because I love a little nonfiction moment about the television industry. And that's what this is. It's a book. The first half of this book is split into 2 parts. The first part is a lot about troubled productions in Hollywood, be that from producer overreach or toxic, set workplaces by actors or people behind the scenes in whatever capacity. So there's a lot of that up front. And then the second part of this book really tries to frame, like, how do we change this? And it continues with some, like, other examples that hadn't already been included from different sets and different shows or movies or productions or whatever. And I just think that the section on, like, the reform aspect was the weaker section. It just was. I don't think that the reform section really offered any useful or creative or beneficial ideas going forward. And also, I don't think anyone is picking up this book by Maureen Ryan, who has, covered television for, I think, like 2 decades, maybe even closer to 3 decades. Like, they've covered a lot of TV, they've seen a lot of things, and so like I understand that they're a respected voice in the industry or whatever, but at the same time, like I don't think anyone's coming to this book for lessons on what to do better when a lot of the presented solutions are things that have already been mentioned by other people before this book. And so I don't know. I feel like I understood that they were trying to go for a balance, but in the end, I just feel like the balance wasn't quite there. But it was a good book and I do recommend it. Then I read my longest book of the year. This is also one of my favorites. Like when I was reading this book, the patrons knew I was into it because the vlogs were vlogging. Okay, like we were deep in the trenches. And so I read Fall of Giants by Ken Follett. This is the first book in his Century trilogy, which is chronicling the 20th century. I think we got it correct there. So it's chronicling the 20th century, starting from the starts in 1913. I think it like starts in 1910, and then the first chapter jumps to 1913, and so this book chronicles from like 1913 all the way to like 1924, I think, is the epilogue. And so we are following 5 families from various parts of the globe, not so varied, but a little bit varied. So we have a Welsh family that is, it really anchors the beginning, like 25% of this book almost. We have an American diplomat, we have a German diplomat, and we have, what is the word I'm looking for here? Russian orphans. We have some Russian orphans, and I think we have, I guess, like the royals, like this little English nobility is also kind of one of the families. And so we're seeing them as World War One comes into play and how that impacts all of these people and how their lives criss and cross. And this book was just chef's kiss. I don't think that like the descriptions or I really went into this book really thinking that it was going to be really heavy on the World War One like battle aspects, but because we're following so many different people from so many different parts of life and so many different parts of the world, I think that's what I'm trying to say here. We don't really spend too many times on the battlefield. Like there isn't too much of us just sitting in a trench, firing guns at one another. I really did feel for the characters in here, and I really did feel for the mess. Like the mess lived up to the hype because it's the first book in a trilogy. We're going to follow these families, and so many people at the beginning of this book are single or young. Over the course of the series, we do, or at least of this first book, we get to see people getting pregnant and having these relationships, and it was good. It was good. The relationships were good. Is the romance like great? Not necessarily. I don't think any of the romances are like swoon worthy, but they lived up to what I needed them to live up to, and so for that, I'm fine. I'm happy. Then I read a book that made me not so happy. And that was Blood Debts by Terry J. Benton Walker. And I was really excited for this. This was the book that won the poll. I had to read it. And so I said, again, it was that time where it's like the middle of the month. And I said I hadn't read it yet. And I've been really good in 2023 about actually reading the book in the month. Like there were some times before where it'd be like the last day of the month, and I was like scrambling to put the vlog together. So I've been better about it. And this book was fine. It really did surprise me. I thought this was a historical novel, and it's definitely set in the present. Again, we're following a family in New Orleans who used to be at like the top of the hierarchy for the magical society in which they are part of. But 30 years ago, their grandfather, I believe, they were accused of cursing the mayor or the mayor's daughter. And so the townsfolk of New Orleans burst into their home and lynched her and her husband. And ever since, this other family has been at the top of the hierarchy. And so now we're following as our twins, Clement and his sister, whose name I've forgotten, are trying to clear their grandmother's name, essentially, and also help their mother, who at the beginning of the book is suffering. And so the book is them about trying to help their family, and along the way, they do uncover what happened to their grandmother and the people responsible for it, and they seek vengeance for that. It was a good book. It was very solid. The middle of the book was a little bit boring. It dragged a little bit for me, and some of the characters were just a little bit too stupid, I think, to live and survive. But apparently the sequel is supposed to be just like very intense. I do think for younger readers, like the actual target demographic for Blood Debts, I think they would enjoy this more than I did. I think that they would probably have a 4 or 5 star time. It's just, for me, it was fine. And so I do base my books based on my own I do rate the books on my own like subjective enjoyment of them, but I can see a world in which somebody else would give this book a higher rating than I did. Then we had a nice little turnaround, and I read Free Radicals by Leela Risen. And so here we're following African American Mafi, who is going to school, and she's not really the most popular person. She used to be part of this little friend group that kind of fell apart, and after it fell apart, she became the person, like the school's prankster, where if you needed vengeance on somebody, you would write a little note and you would put it in this little special tree on the school grounds. And maybe if you were, ever so lucky, the prankster person would come and they would get retribution for you. And so that person is Mafi. In the beginning of the book, I really thought this was going to be kind of like Ride or Die, where it's going to be like this series of escalating pranks that are happening. And that's not really what it is. Like, that plays into the beginning part, but eventually it does kind of morph into this contemporary romance-esque situation where Mafi has a relationship with her brother's teammate because her brother is a basketball player. But really, at the core of the story is it's a family story. It's about Mafi and her brother and her dad, her mother and her grandfather, and the ways that they are connected to one another, and how her father came to this country and has tried to assimilate, and how Mafi is trying to embrace being an Afghan American and not be ashamed of that. And so the book is good. I really enjoyed it. This book has like next to no ratings on Goodreads. Like, nobody is checking for this book, which I think is a shame because I really enjoyed it and had a good time. And I think you guys would have a good time too. So I do recommend it. I know that it's YA and everyone's like too cool for YA these days, but come on now. Like, it was a good time. The next book I read in the month of June was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I'm not a Riley Sager truther. I read one Riley Sager. I read Final Girls because way back in the day, like 2 years ago, when Grady Hendrix put out his book, The Final Girl Support Group, there was like a brief time where apparently Riley Sager had like tweeted out some shade because he has a book called Final Girls, and it's about a group of Final Girls. And Riley Sager had a book called Final Girl Support Group, and he was, Mr. Sager had to clap back. And I think that, Riley has since deleted the tweet. I don't think the tweet was up for like more than like 10 minutes. And he deleted the tweet. And I said, well, I do have to stand a petty man, so I should probably read one of his books. And so I read Final Girls. And let's just say that Final Girls is definitely better than the Final Girl Support Group. It just is. Point blank period. No questions asked. Don't even try me. So because of that, I've really appreciated Riley. And none of his other books have really appealed to me as a reader. But there's something about this cover. Something about this. This The Only One Left. It reminds me. I didn't know this was a set in the 80s when I went into it. I just kind of went for it. And so when I saw this cover, it reminded me of like a Stephen King cover from that similar time period. Very striking, just really bold. And I had to read it. And I think that this aesthetic sold the story. So this is the story about Kit, who is coming back to work for this, what is the word I'm looking for here? Like home health care aid company, after she had previously been accused of like maybe killing one of her patients. Who knows? We don't know. We just know that she has been accused of that. And in order for her to come back to work here, she has been assigned to care for Lenora Hope. Lenora Hope is kind of like a local legend. She, in her youth, was accused of killing her mother, her father, and her sister. And until this point, Kit didn't even think this woman was still alive. She had thought that, like so long ago, like this woman is dead, but she's very much not dead. And so she arrives at the Hope Estate, which is it's in the rich part of town, but it's on this crumbling hillside. Like, she gets to the house and it's very clearly like what is the word I'm looking for? It's very ostentatious, but it's very clearly seen better days. So she arrives and she is, doing her job, but the house is kind of uneasy. There's the atmosphere in the house I thought was really well done. And so the story kind of goes from there, where eventually Kit and Lenora start to communicate. Lenora is, she can only move her left hand. It's the only thing she can do. She can't talk, she can't walk, she can't do nothing but move that little left hand. And so she is completely dependent on Kit. And over the course of the story, Lenora starts to slowly tell Kit her life story about what happened the night that her family was slaughtered in that house, her truth of what happened. And when I tell you that this was an excellent read, it was an excellent read. I gave this book 5 stars. I could see a case of somebody giving it 4 stars, like I understand, but to me, the way that this book went on, it was just too good. It was just, I had a fun time reading it. I was glued to the book. The last 25% of this book is definitely a roller coaster. I definitely think that Riley Sager throws everything out the wall. Like, he just gives you twist after twist after twist after loop to loop after loop to loop after twist. But I think that they all worked. Like, nothing of like what he was throwing at you was like, and then the dog did it. And it wasn't just the dog, it was the cat too. And not only was it the dog and the cat, it was also a witch. I mean, maybe there's a witch. I don't know. You'll have to read and find out. But like, nothing felt ridiculous. It was just like, okay. Like, every time a new layer was added, I was like, well, I mean, it makes sense. Like, layers weren't being added, and I was like, wait, but that kind of contradicts the previous layer. It was kind of like, okay. I do think that you could play along with this. I don't think the book is written for you to play along, though. I don't think it's written in that way for you to kind of guess, but that's fine, because I don't think it's impossible. I mean, I'm not going to, but like I said, I had a fun time. I do recommend it. Please go read it. A book that I don't recommend, a book that I don't want you to read, is This One's For You by Kate Sweeney. This was horrible. This was a debut novel, and it was doing entirely too much. At 288 pages, This One For You is the story of 2 characters, Caspian and his little friend, whose name I don't really remember. And Caspian's mother has been dead for a really long time, and he kind of plays the guitar in the BART station, which is like the train. He plays at the train station a couple of times. And his friend, they used to be friends. Let me just go get her name. I think it was Sydney. That's what it was. It was fucking Sydney. So Sydney and Caspian, they used to be friends, but now Sydney is kind of the black sheep of her family. She's like this emo alt girl, and unlike the rest of her family who have really great college prospects, she's going to work at this little music venue. And so eventually Caspian and Sydney, they team up and they decide that they are going to reconcile their friendship and go on a road trip to see the band, because, Caspian's mom was in a band and that band is now on tour. They're not super famous or anything. It's really just like a bunch of house moms, like housewives or whatever, like regular women who have a 9 to 5, but they've decided to come back together because it's like their anniversary and they're just going to go on tour. And so Caspian and Sydney, they start following this band around the Western United States, and they rekindle their friendship, and maybe they explore something more. And then they also have like stuff going on with each of their families, because again, Sydney's dealing with being the black sheep and like Loki being kicked out of her house, and Caspian is dealing with the fact that his dad doesn't really talk about anything ever, not emotions on his mom. Just there's like these 2 people existing in the same house. It just wasn't very good. Wasn't very good at all. Can't recommend it. Don't know who it was for. It was an all-around horrible book. I was the last person on the face of the planet to read Little Fires Everywhere, but I did give it 5 stars. It was a good time. I listened to the audio because I had recently purchased a physical copy during the little independent bookstore day. So what was that, back in April, beginning of May? I found the cover. I found Little Fires Everywhere in hardcover, so I had to purchase myself a copy. So this is the story of how when Mia Warren came to Shaker Heights and started renting an apartment from the Richardsons, everything in all of their lives sort of crumbled and fell apart. Kind of like Haley Aldridge, this book is mostly told in extensive flashbacks, and I think that did help the narrative in terms of us getting to learn more about Mia and her family, and then also about the Richardsons and how they played into everything. It was a good book. I didn't think this book was as good as it was. I do think that the how do I say this? The show that Reese Witherspoon produced race bends the character of Mia Warren and makes them a black family, and in some ways I do think that deepens some of the conversations that are had in this book, but I also think it complicates a couple of them. So I would be interested in like watching the show just to see how they address that and what they were doing there. But overall, I did appreciate Little Fires Everywhere. I liked the characters and the journeys that all of them went on. So It's a book I do recommend. The next two are also things that I read in a reading vlog. So The Boyfriend Candidate and Midnight is the Darkest Hour, I will leave linked in the cards. But spoiler alert, was not a good 36 hours, was not well handled. We are coming to the end. I have three more things to talk about. So, first up on that list is Fourth Wing, Rebecca Yarros. The girlies are eating this book up. The girlies are obsessed with this book, and I couldn't rate it. Hear me out. I think that Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros isn't horrible. I do understand the appeal. And I did talk about this on Patreon, obviously, because, it was June, so I was daily vlogging all of these things. But one of the things that I talked about in my review of this book over on Patreon is I do think that Entangled has a formula. I think it has a formula, and I think the formula was exposed when Rebecca Yarros got on TikTok and said that she applauded 5 books. Because I think that Fourth Wing is really just following in the Crave formula. I think that Tracy Wolf has sons, and I think the Fourth Wing is just a higher fantasy, a secondary world fantasy version of the Crave series. I'm not saying that none of the ideas that are presented in Fourth Wing are unique or interesting, but I do think that Crave and Fourth Wing function in the same way, and I think that it's not a surprise to me that Crave blew up in the first wave of TikTok sensations, and that now that we're in this heavy spice era of TikTok sensations, Fourth Wing would be the book that comes in with that and has more explicit scenes than the early. I've not finished the Crave books, but I don't think that it's a surprise that the more explicit version in Fourth Wing is writing this spicy book talk wave where there's spicier content, and it's just there. I also think that this book does harken back to not the Hunger Games or the Divergent, maybe not the name brand versions of these beloved series from that time, but all the series from that era that kind of rode the coattails. So maybe it's not the Hunger Games or Divergent, but it could be Wither, those books that had those weird covers that no one cared about. Maybe it's not Twilight, but it's, or Vampire Academy, but it's House of Night. You know what I mean? It's not the big flashy everyone everywhere read those things, but it's okay, you read that and you're still a reader, so you're still in the library and you're looking for something similar. And so Fourth Wing feels like that, and I think that it is fine. I understand how readers were getting through this. I understand why it's popular, and I do think that it does have a part to play, that Entangled was just sending this to everybody. Everybody was getting this book. It was everywhere. You could not find a bookstore that was not carrying this book. It was kind of it's not the ugliest cover. It's not the prettiest cover. It's not going to be super divisive. So it makes sense that this book was everywhere. It got everywhere. And I did enjoy it. I'm not one of the people that hated it. I have seen some reviews, and having read the book, I do continue to believe that we are having some reading comprehension issues. The girlies are having some issues, and listen, I'm right there with you. If you go watch those Patreon vlogs, several times I have to come back in another update and let y'all know. Fall of Giants, I had some major little issues. I thought a character had died, and I was very excited, and I had to come back and go, y'all, that man was not dead. Wasn't dead. I just misread the book. So I get it. Okay, we're like this. Me and reading comprehension, we also don't always see eye to eye. But some of the complaints I've seen about Fourth Wing, it's the comprehension is not there. Now, does the society make sense? No, not at all. But some of the things that y'all were saying didn't make sense. I don't really think that y'all were reading the same book I was reading. But like I said, overall, it was a fun time. It was enjoyable enough. But I just can't bring myself to rate it because I don't know what to do. In my heart of hearts, 3. If you had a gun to my head, 3. But y'all don't have a gun to my head. And it's not that important to me. So it just is what it is. The second to last book I read this month, or in the last month, June, was When You Wish Upon a Lantern by Gloria Chow. This is the story of Li Ya and her friend Kai. Their families run stores that are next to one another in Chicago's Chinatown, but their families do not get along. Kai's family runs a bakery, and his father does not really care about keeping the alleyway clean or, disposing of the bread in a way that doesn't ruin the trash cans. And so Leah's family is always upset with them. And so one day, Leah discovers that her family business is not doing as hot as she thinks it is or thought it was. And she is kind of determined to turn it around and to get the business back in the green. So her family runs a lantern slash general goods store. Like they have these wishing lanterns that they're known for because the store is called When You Wish Upon a Lantern. Um, I think it's called that, or Lantern is the name of her family store. But they also sell like just general Asian goodies like snacks, candies, trinkets, various like things that you would find at your local Asian market. And so she's determined to set this up because back in the day, her and her grandmother, who has now passed away, they would find out what these people had bought these wishing lanterns, were wishing for, and they would do what they could to make the wishes come true. And so now she has brought in her friend Kai to help her bring these wishes come true, to like make these things happen. This is a little bit significant because prior to the start of the story, Kai and Lee Ya had gone out on a date. Kind of like they're hanging out, and Kai asked her out on a date, but there was a miscommunication that happened. And so miscommunication is at the seed of this book, but it's also them coming back together and overcoming that miscommunication is like the entire plot of the book. And so like it feels very strange to complain about miscommunication when the whole book is about them overcoming it, like it just is what it is. But I had a really fun time. This book is kind of set in this similar time period that we are now, late June to early August, and I had a fun time reading about it. I liked Leah, I liked Kai. I think they had a really fun, very cute, very logical teenage relationship, and it was a good time. The last book I read was a massive disappointment. And I can't say that it wasn't surprised. Like, I don't think I thought this was going to be a new favorite, but I did hope. I did wish that it could be. And that book is Blood Mercy by Vila Roth. This is one of Erin's favorite series at the moment. And Stephanie from Stephanie's Bookish is reading it, and Tammy is flying through it. And I just thought this was fine. We are set in some magical world here, and our two main characters are Cassia and Leo. And Leo is a vampire-coded character. They're called the Hesperines, I believe, which really just reminded me of the Poppy War and the Hesperians. But that's just because I listened to that book. And so maybe in writing is different. But the entire time I was reading about these vampires, I was thinking about R.F. Kuang, which did not help. But doesn't matter. So the first part of the book is Cassia and Leo just not really knowing one another. It's Leo arriving in the kingdom because they are here to renew a treaty or negotiate a treaty or something with this treaty that doesn't matter at all. And so it's him floating around because he doesn't want to walk anywhere. So he's hovering over the ground everywhere he goes. I thought it was a little bit silly. Complaining about the stench of rotting meat and how his kind is so much better because everything they consume is alive and stays alive when they're done, and they don't have to kill anything because killing is so just vulgar and disgusting and it feels like rotting flesh, and don't they know that there's mold? It's very silly. And then Cassia is like, oh my goodness, it's the vampires in town. Maybe I can get out of here. And so the book then, for 100 pages, is that. It's the rotting fleet and the, oh my goodness, maybe I can get out of here. And then around at the 150 page mark, Leo meets Cassia, and she is the love interest for one reason and one reason only, and it's because she has soap. She uses soap. Nobody else in the kingdom is apparently using soap. They're addicted to their scented oils, so they're just walking around in perfume, but not Cassia. Cassia washes, and so because she washes, she smells nice, and so he wants to bone her because she smells nice. And so then we have 150 pages of them getting to know one another, kind of, them talking, getting us, the reader, getting to understand what the Hesperines are, how they function, how they survive, what they do to live. Okay. And then after we got all that basic information, it's 150 pages of them being in lust, them wanting to bone, them boning, it's just very gratuitous. And the entire time I was reading this, I was like, okay, but y'all told me this was a plot. They had a plot. There was a plot somewhere. Y'all were telling me this is a plot focused fantasy romance, but there's no plot here. Where's the plot? Y'all promised a plot. Where's the plot? And so in the last 150 pages of the book, we do kind of get a plot where we find out things. We find out the characters have been maneuvering and plotting and scheming, but these characters don't really mean anything, and they're not important. I mean, they're important, but we haven't really spent a lot of time with them, it feels like, and they're just doing things because you need them to do things. So our characters have something to work against, and then the book is just kind of over. And so for me, it just felt like so much of this book was just long conversations in a series of voids. I never really had a good feel for the world that they inhabited, what anything looked like, what these characters really looked like, what they were doing in these locations, other than like standing and talking to one another. And the 150 pages of sex. And so it just felt very mediocre. It felt very much like the epitome of something that was on Kindle Unlimited, where Vila Roth just sat down to write, and because she was getting paid by the page count, that she just kept writing. And maybe if I had read this on my Kindle, I would have been fine. But my library had a copy of this, so I was reading it physically, and it was just like none of it felt necessary, and there was no plot to speak of, and there was no dynamic characters or any. It was, in my opinion, one of the worst fantasy romances that I've read, and maybe it doesn't even deserve a 2-star. Like maybe it really does deserve a 1, because it was just very mediocre in my opinion, and I just don't think I'm going to continue on with the series, particularly because there's so many books. I thought there was only like 7 or something, but apparently there's like well, first of all, I don't understand, because I think it's like book 2 is book 2, but then I think book 3 is split into 2 parts, and book 4 is split into 2 parts. I think book 5 is also split into 2 parts. It's just too complicated for me, and the series isn't over. The series is not completing until next year, and so even if I wanted to continue to use my little KU subscription, my little free trial on it, I just don't see myself doing that, because it wasn't a good book. Didn't really get anything out of it. And so for me, I think this is going to be the end of the road for Vila Roth, and I'm just not going to continue. So those are all the things that I have read recently that I have forgotten to talk to you guys about. So let me know down below what you've been reading recently. What are some of your recent favorites? For me, I think that The Only One Left, Drowning, and Little Fires, like those are probably going to be my favorites. Like even the other ones I had a good time with, things like Follow Giants, although I am very much looking forward to continuing that series into the summer, or even other 5 stars like You Don't Have a Shot. Like they're good, but You Don't Have Drowning, Little Fires, and The Only One Left. Those are top picks of the summer right now for me. So I'm gonna go. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys again soon in another video, but until then, and until next time, bye.